I usually like to put my subject on the one of the thirds of the painting. So if that makes sense, if you divide the painting into imaginary grids, something on the thirds like this, or over here, any one of these lines, imaginary, it just makes the painting look better. You can look up stuff on Google that can explain the rule of thirds a little bit better. Let's see, I don't know what we're gonna do today. I like making my lines sloppy. If you watched any of my other videos, you'll know that's kind of key to line and wash. But we're just gonna wing it and see what happens. We're gonna start with a little house. Perspective is another big thing to learn. Perspective can make or break your painting. And so learning how to create a horizon line and how everything falls in line with that horizon can be important. And maybe I'll do a video on that, but you kind of want to imagine yourself in the scene and being a little bit lower in perspective than your house, unless you want it on like a hill or whatever. Let's see. That'll work. We're gonna make this guy a tall house because why not? That's the fun part, is you can totally take this technique and make it whatever you want. Like if you want to do you do you. You don't even have to follow along exactly with what I'm doing. In fact, I encourage you to kind of experiment. This is a good way to learn how to start, but the more you can just kind of picture things and just go for it, the more fun I think you'll have in this entire process. Personally, that'll be a window there, and that'll be a window there. And so this is kind of a perspective trick. So my windows are lining up with my house line. With the roof. So if all of your lines align with the other lines, then that'll help everything kind of morph together. So kind of like what I'm gonna do here is, here will be a ginormous window. And you wouldn't want to have like a line going like this, because that'd make your perspective really weird. You want it to kind of match all of the other lines on your house for it to make sense. So something like that, sure. And we'll give these little curtains. And like I said, I'm doing this from memory. It can be from a reference if you want. It can be from memory. Doesn't really matter to me. And scribbly is okay. These kind of look better if they're messier, in my opinion. We'll have a little... Yeah, I didn't like that too much, but that's okay. We'll give this guy another little roof. It's gonna be a weird, funky house. That's okay. We like funky houses. Yeah, my lines get super rough, which is... it takes a little bit of mental hurdling to get over that weird obsessive compulsive need to like have everything look uniform and perfect, and it's yeah, it happened to me. It took me a while to really get over that fear of just letting go and kind of like letting the lines just fall on the paper. If you would have talked to me 3 years ago, I don't know, that was a rough estimate of years, but I would have never done this jagged line as jagged as I did. But you just learn to let go and say, you know what, screw it. It's okay. We're Bob Ross in it. Happy mistakes. Cool, that looks kind of dope. We'll have like a little bush. Bushes kind of resemble little clouds for me. You can do like fluffy little little loop-de-loops. Key is to not make them uniform, you know, just kind of random, so don't really plot out what you're doing. And that looks good to me. We'll give it, we want this one overlooking something, so we're gonna put it on a hill. So let's see, jagged lines. And I don't want to keep like a very straight line. I want the house to sit on the hill. So if you were to create like a straight line right here, it'd kind of nestle that house right up along that hill, which can look good. Sometimes you can bring the line of the rest of the hill back here, which will make it look like it's sitting more on like a different perspective. So we'll kind of experiment with that in a second. We'll see, but we're gonna give it a little tree right here. Fill in that frame a little bit. Cool. Sure, it's sitting on a cliff. Not super realistic, but that's okay. Maybe we will have it kind of nestled in like that, but let's make those bricks like that. Little squares. Maybe some shingling on the side. Cool, okay. And then this will have a little path coming off, which, you know, super jagged lines once again. And with paths and generally with lines and stuff, you want them all kind of going the same way. So I would never really, especially for a path like this, I wouldn't create a straight line going up like this. I'd want it to all kind of go sideways like that. It just makes your strokes look more consistent and can look really, really bizarre if you start using different strokes. But for the homes, a lot of them are going upwards, and for the path it goes sideways. For this, it's going a little bit more downward. So make sure you're trying to keep consistent strokes throughout the painting, and that can give a sense of cohesion, in my humble opinion. Cool, that's looking pretty sweet. You know, we'll give this guy like a little power thing up top for our power lines to connect to. It's looking good. And then off in the distance, the reason I left this blank is because there will be like mountains and stuff like that, which we can come back through and add some pen to. I just don't know what the shape is gonna be like right now. But let's start with that. So we're gonna start with the sky. I just take blues and I'm really just mixing colors until I think they look good on my little watercolor thing over here. And the key with watercolor is as you're painting, you've heard it a million times, the more water and the less color, the lighter the color will be. Don't add white to your color because that's gonna dilute it and muddy it. Oh no, no. Nice thing about watercolor is if you drop it on the paper like I just did, if it's still wet, you can usually get most of the pigment off the paper. So don't fret, you know, the more it dries, the harder time you're gonna have. Okay, so I'm a big fan of the loose, sloppy, wet on wet technique. This is technically not wet on wet right now, but I like that loose look. So we're just gonna get a generous amount of water on our brush with our blue and just go for the sky. And I usually start top down, doesn't really matter. You don't even have to bring it all the way to the tape. That can create really cool looks. White space in between your blue can create clouds, depending on what you're wanting. And I'm kind of just dabbing it onto the paper randomly, but keeping my lines going a consistent pattern, left to right, right to left, whatever you want. That's where the cohesion comes in. If I were to start doing lines up and down, it just want to look consistent. So that's what I mean by consistent brushstroke. And you can always come back and add more pigment. Keep in mind that your pigments will dry lighter than you think. So just be aware of that and be ready to come back over later after it's dried. Working in layers for sure. But the reason I start top down is because generally the top of your sky will be darker than the horizon. So if we imagine a horizon coming down, if you want to create depth, having that fade and do a graduated wash, which is kind of a color that starts to blend as it goes towards the horizon, or a graduated wash is, that's not the right definition, but it's a color that fades into itself over the course of your painting. I'm doing a crap job at explaining this, but if you look it up, a lot of other YouTubers explain it really well, and it's a great technique for all this stuff. And I'm using the same brush the entire time. I don't really change. These brushes where it's got that kind of slanted edge are really nice because you can do big broad strokes or more fine-tuned work. But for the sloppier stuff, I love them. They're great. Okay. And then I'm gonna take less water, and if you have parts that have too much, you can always come dab them off. Be warned, you will start to kind of create a little pattern with your dabbing. Just the kids call it these days. Cool, that looks pretty good so far. So now we're gonna come in and you're gonna kind of picture where you want your light source coming from. So we'll just say, hey, the sun's coming from here. So this side of your house will be lit, this side will be shaded. So that's very important for consistency's sake to remember. You want your light sources to be consistent, so creating shadows where shadows would be appropriate. So I'm gonna create a little bit of a purple, so mixing red with blue creates a nice purple, and that can create some cool shadows on your house. Peter Schiller, he's a great guy to reference, and that's kind of where I learned it from, watching his videos. But we're gonna create little shadows. So if you can imagine this roof part coming off, it's gonna create a little bit of a shadow on that part because the light's hitting it and then creating a cast on the house. Like so. And we can always come back and go darker. You don't want to go too dark, too fast, because it can really screw you up, you know. There's another cast on this roof, so boom, paint that in. It's pretty simple. Like, you can do these paintings really fast. Oh, here's a good one. So the light's gonna hit right here, but since it's covered by this roof, you're gonna get this big slant like that. So we're gonna fill that in. Yeah, that's looking good. And then basically the entire side of those houses are gonna be shadowed, but we don't want to have our colors bleed into each other. So that's a good thing to remember, is as you're painting, wet will attract paint. So wherever it's still wet is going to bleed into. So if I were to paint this house right here, it'll bleed into that blue, which could look cool, but if you're not careful, it can really muddy up a lot of your colors. So we're going to focus on the grass for now while that other stuff dries. You can always bring a hair dryer and dry it off if you want, but we're just going to come in and fill in some of this. Like I said, I'm not going super dark. It's harder to reverse dark colors. It's harder to cover them up or do something different if you say you don't like it. So it's easier to build up tones as you go. I'm just filling in the shrubbery. Cool, that's looking good. And even like little stuff like right here, I don't know if it's hard to see, but on my plant, leaving little bits of white can create cool kind of cartoony looks. I like them. It's up to you, really. And then we're just going to come through and just kind of fill this in. Like I said, you're not trying to create an entire block of green, because that can just look odd. And I'm not going over my path with green at all. I'm just coming through, keeping my strokes consistent, going left to right instead of up and down. So see, if I were to start doing strokes like this, how odd that looks. It can work for certain scenarios, but generally I like to keep my strokes going a consistent direction. I will repeat myself all the time. We're going to come through and add a little bit of golden color. And this one, I'm not wetting my brush as much. I want it to kind of be a little bit more pigmented. And just adding in little strokes with the edge of my brush, not the flat spot, the more of the edge, and it creates those fine lines. And since I'm using less water, I get a little bit more saturation in that. Now we're going to come through with a little bit of brown. Got like 3 different shades of brown on this palette. Yeah, we're just creating little patches of grass, you know. A lot of painting is just creating an illusion of something, which can be a little weird to wrap your head around. Is you're saying, hey, this is a representation of this object. This isn't actually there, so it's more up for interpretation. We're getting into like philosophy of painting here. Ooh, that is not a good green in my opinion. So I'm going to blot that off. So see, since it's still wet, you can still be pretty generous getting it away. So since that green was so vivid, I'm going to take a little bit of brown and mix it with my green, and that'll kind of make it more foresty green instead of vibrant, like uber saturated green. And we're just going to come through and add little bits here and there just to kind of break up that big green blob that we have. Yeah, that's looking good. Cool. We're going to come through and add some more saturation into the screen. So like I said, always starting with lighter shades can give you a little bit of more forgiveness in the end. And your houses are also casting a shadow, so it's important to think, okay, since they're casting a shadow on this lawn, grass, hill, whatever it is, it's going to be a little bit darker green closer to that house. And we can come back through and add a little bit of blue hue to that, and that'll give it a little bit more of a shaded look too. So far that's looking pretty good. Cool, let's see. So I want to come back through and start working on that roof, and it can be any color you want. Let's go, we're gonna make it a brown roof with a little bit of red spots in it, like for the shingles, I guess. So we'll go brown, dark brown. It's not a super saturated brown. That's gonna look good. Yeah, that'll work. The thing with this paper is it's got weird little lines in it, so you will get some of those with cheaper papers. It's just a weird texture. It doesn't play super well with your color. It won't hold it. It'll kind of pool up, so you don't want to be overly wet with your technique, just because these cheaper papers will start to either sink and create puddles or kind of bulge up a little bit, which is normal with all paper, but these ones especially are prone to it, so be warned. Arches will not be as prone to that, but will still, you know, it holds color very differently than these. For the windows, we're going to come through and add a little bit of blue. I leave little white streaks in my windows because it creates the illusion of reflection. And mainly just in these front windows. These back windows, they can be completely black because you won't have much reflection in those, you know. I'll leave my curtains white though, I'll tell you that much. And see how I went way out of the lines on this window? You can come back and just blot it up and say, nope, not today, Mr. Window crappy drawing. I did it again. Oh well. Okay. So now we're going to come back through and start kind of defining our shadows a little bit more. So we're working in passes, building up our tones. So we're going to come back through with more of that purple and darken it a little bit. Do you see how that works? Isn't that fascinating stuff? We don't want to do a full wash yet because we will paint over our blue windows and it will smudge and the color will look terrible. So that's something to be mindful of. Let's come back through and add some red brick. Actually, no, we don't want to do that because our roof is still wet. I almost did what I just told you not to do. We'll still build up our shadows on our roof then like this. I'm adding in quite a bit of blue into here, and that'll really separate it. And we'll come back through with a pen and kind of go back over this section and redefine our lines because they kind of get lost in that a little bit. That's looking pretty cool. Let's touch our sky and see. Cheaper papers, you also get something called cauliflower, which kind of creates these weird little blossoms of color that don't look consistent, which is just something you'll have to deal with, unfortunately. But it's probably due to too much water sitting on the paper for too long, I would assume, but don't quote me on that because I don't know. We're going to come back through and add in some mountains. So I'm just taking the edge of my brush and defining just a little line. You don't want it to be too perfect. Perfection is not nature. Yes, we're painting over our sky, but it's a pretty light hue, right? And it's, once again, as you go down towards your horizon, it's getting a little bit lighter. But I want those to be a little bit more purple, so I'm going to mix some red and blue and come back through and kind of define that. Yeah, that's looking good. And maybe we'll add in some really light green down in that base because We're looking over a pasture, I guess, or something. I don't even know where this person lives. This is probably the best view in the entire world, right? That can just give it a little bit of depth to your painting instead of it just being all flat right there, right? Ooh, I've made too many little lines. I don't like that. So I'm going to come back through with just some water and kind of blend them together. I had a lot of like little jagged lines, which I didn't like. Didn't look super good to me. And even then, I'm going to come back through, add in a little bit more contrast with my greens. It's pretty wet. Yeah, you know, gotta be careful of that, but we're just going for it for the sake of time. Cool. Okay, we're gonna come back through and kind of define that mountain a little bit. Mountain. I'm from a place where we pronounce mountain. So I'm adding in more purple so it's not the same color as the sky. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. And it's very not a perfect, a perfect, oh my God, a perfect. Cool, that's looking sweet. So I'm gonna pause and come back after this is dry. I'm gonna go grab a hairdryer and dry it. So we'll be right back. Okay, now that our painting is dry, we can come back through and start working on other layers. You know, that is something to keep in mind, is to make sure you don't start working on a layer unless you're certain it's dry and you want to start working on that layer. If you want to work on a wet layer, go for it, but it is going to make your life extremely difficult if you do that without it unintentionally being wet. You know, it's a horrible way to describe it. Be intentional with your layers. If you want to work on a wet layer, that's fine, but if you don't want your colors to bleed, then let it dry or force it to dry with a hair dryer or whatever, you know. It's coming back through, adding a little bit of light blue on the side of that house can give it a nice shade or shadow. I'm going to come through and add in a little bit darker because it's a pretty sunny day, I guess. There we go. It's looking good. We're going to come back through and add a little bit of that blue into the grass. And that'll just kind of add a little, it's a light wash of cohesion. You don't want it to be too apparent. Yeah, it's looking good. I want these windows to kind of stand out. So we're going to add a pretty hefty amount of blue onto our brush without water. And come back through and define those. Keep in mind it will bleed into the other color. So that's just something you'll have to deal with. Sweet, it's looking good. I want a little bit more definition on this roof. It's because it's kind of just a block of brown. So we're going to come through and add in some bricks. Which I'm just using a very fine point of my brush and adding in lines fairly randomly. You don't want it to be too uniform and too blocky. But you want it to go the same way as your roof. You don't want to do up and down lines. You want to do like little sideways dots or lines. And be very sparing with these, you know. You do not want to overdo it, you know. And keep them pretty random for sure. Okay, now we're going to add in some brick on the house, which can be the same brown. And that just, it makes it look cool. It gives it a little bit of texture instead of just being this white block, you know? Gives it a little bit of age and kind of rustic feel to it. So we're going to do that with our window seals. Come in and add some pretty intense brown. Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's looking pretty cool. Even on your shaded side, keeping in mind that your colors will bleed, but sometimes that is okay. Yeah, that's giving a little bit more character to it, you know? Come back through and define these shadows a little bit more. Especially underneath the roof. Cool. Now we're going to do our little path. It can just be a light brown. And come out and just follow your path down. It's okay if it goes into the grass a little bit. That's fine with me. That was pretty wet, so we kind of, you can always come back and soak up some color with your brush. If it's not got any water on it, you can kind of come through and reverse it. Cool. It's looking pretty good. So we're going to dry it again really fast, and then we're going to come back through with our pen. Sweet. Okay, so there's a little bit of cauliflower on the bottom of this house, but that's okay. That happens when you force it to dry faster than it normally would, so just be aware of that. But that's okay. So I'm just coming back through and adding in some more details. Trying to redefine some of those lines that got lost in that color. Bring it back to life a little bit. Define those bushes, this tree. Give the house a little bit more. Giving it some more definition in those shadows along the roof line. Basically, we're adding the equivalent of contrast back into the image with some of our lines. With the grass, you can create little modules of grass just kind of by following your previous pen strokes. Like I said, keeping your lines going left to right. You don't want to make these big blocky shapes. You want it to be pretty random looking. We're going to come back through and add some stones, just little circles. Same idea. You don't want them to be circles. You want them to be a little bit more flat looking because of the perspective. We'll add some stuff into this tree. And since these windows are on the other side of the house, I'm going to kind of color them in actually with a little bit of black ink. Just because they would be a little bit darker on this side. That'll really give it some contrast. And you can leave the color if you want. I just decided, spur of the moment, that, hey, I wanted them to be darker. Coming in and redefining some of these windowsills that we didn't define before. It's okay if you don't follow the color perfectly. I actually like it better when it's kind of in and outside of the lines. Or like a children's book or something. Define some of these bricks really quick. Give it some more character. And this final touch stuff is really what brings the brings the painting to life. I had something in my throat. In my opinion, little tufts of grass, I guess. Like that. And then we'll do some birds. The classic M, but not so much an M, just, you know, a little bit more rough than that. Just to kind of balance it out and give you something to look at other than the house. Having face different ways is great. Not too many, not too little. Maybe come in and add a little bit of line. Not a completely solid line on this mountain, but just some rough lines to make it look intentional back there instead of just kind of like this random purple blob, you know. And actually, I'm gonna create a little stream. So we're just gonna, I feel like this house should be overlooking a stream. So that's the nice part. If you don't go too dark, you can always come back and add stuff. And so horizon lines, everything as it gets further away, it gets thinner. So this line kind of converges on itself way off into the distance, right? And so that's important to remember. And then we're going to come through with some blue. And we don't want it to be a solid thing of blue. We just want it to be very light and happy. So we're going to come back through and just add in some streaks of blue. And that'll just give us a nice little stream and give us more to that horizon instead of just being a kind of barren wasteland that it was. And then we'll come back through, and we're not going to define these with a pen. We're just going to kind of randomly put them. A little bit of green mixed with brown. And then we're going to add in little bits of shrubbery. So just kind of like breaking up that monotonous kind of matte color back in there. Converging off of the mountain. That was a little too much. I'm just going to come through with some water on my brush and kind of smooth out those transitions a little bit. Having them kind of swoop up or swoop down with the mountain base is important. We're going to come back through and add some more to that. Ooh, that was a lot. Okay, so emergency, we're going to take some water on our brush. And that is going to do it for today. Always sign your work. My signature gets worse and worse and worse. Now we're going to pull off the tape. Pull down in diagonal, and that should minimize tearing of your paper. That's the worst, is finishing a painting. And just be careful with it as you do it. But yeah, typically pull away from the painting. This is my favorite part because it just adds in that final layer of completeness to it. Making sure you don't smudge your fresh paint on there. And that's going to do it for today. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, share this video with all your friends, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.